Hello, Jay.
Hello.
Thanks for coming to my podcast. We're going to talk about several topics, but first let me geek out about Fallout.
Wonderful.
Thanks for making such a great series. It's probably my number one this year. I'm a big fan of the games, obviously. So my number one question is, have you played the games?
I have.
Which one?
I played Fallout 4. I played as long as I could before I realized that I needed to do more prep and focus on the whole Fallout world. And I couldn't just dive into one game. So then I started watching playthroughs of all the games so I could get a better sense of the whole mythology for the entire series. And so then I just delved into all of those so I could get an understanding. And then when I started understanding what parts we were focusing on for the series and sort of more around those mythologies, those are the sequences and the gameplays that I started watching and focusing on a little bit more.
Because to my mind, you guys focused on the right points, because Fallout is a quirky game, actually. Yeah. It has this irony part, which is very thick. Also, the aesthetics of the 50s, 60s in a retro-futuristic way. And also, it always had a dynamic storyline of emerging from the vault. And you just nailed all of them. And I was very surprised, because usually video game adaptations are hard. And people usually fail to cater to the fans, and capture the magic. And it just, my non-gamer friends were in awe about the story, and were interested about the game because of your show, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So, but are you a gamer overall? Do you play video games?
Not really. I'm not as much of a gamer. I mostly focused on movies and television, and I actually have a background in theater. So I focus more on, live and that sort of storytelling. I appreciate them. I just I never spent the time on them.
I'll ask you if you can take me through your journey, how you got into VFX, into theater, into movies.
Wow, that's a long story. I started out wanting to be an actor back a long time ago, elementary school and high school. And my director, Dr. Ford, in high school had a huge impact on my life, both as a actor, but mostly actually as a producer. When I was just in high school, he kind of plucked me out just as one of the students. We had a big high school. 2,400 kids in 3 grades, so 800 and about in my graduating class. But he kind of picked me out and he's like, I want you to produce my shows. I'm like, I'm a 16-year-old, 17-year-old. But we then started a theater company together in Santa Monica, and I produced shows in summer while I was getting my degree in acting. And then I realized pretty quick when I was in my when I was still pretty young, that I was a better producer than I was an actor. So I ended up pushing putting the acting on the side and focusing more on producing different types of things.
What made that break?
It was actually, I was doing auditions. I did a season of shows one time with Cyrano de Bergerac, Taming of the Shrew, and My Fair Lady. And I was in the middle of auditions, and there was a community theater. It was not high end, and we had an open audition call. So a few hundred, starving actors came. And they all knew none of them were getting paid. It is not, the top echelon of talent in Los Angeles. And I saw all these actors coming through. And I'm like, wow, these aren't even the best actors. And all of them are better than me. And it was kind of good. They weren't all better than me, but there were different parts where I'm like, yeah, I know what I'm good at. And the other challenge was I was a character actor as a 20-year-old. So I'm like, I just need to wait and get older. I'm like, I'm always playing, I always have to put on makeup and play the old guy. And I knew what type of typecasting I'd get typecast as. And I'm like, I'm not going to. And then I really thought about it. And I'm like, there's thousands of actors in LA trying to get single roles. There's not as many young 20s producers. So let me just focus on that. And that's really what I started focusing on. I started focusing on every type of entertainment job I could get. There was something called clip coordinating back in the day when you didn't have the internet and you had to find clips on videotape for an award show or something. I did a show called 50 Years on the Fast Track, a history of NASCAR stock car racing and country music, 2 things I have no interest in. But I learned a lot about him, and I went through archival footage and got clearances. I liked that. I worked on a show called the Action Movie Awards that never happened, but we were trying to get it off the ground, and I had to watch 12 hours a day of bad action movies in the 90s, Batman and Robin, and oh man, there were some bad ones. And then I just kept trying to find something that I connected with. I was a set PA for the movie Mystery Men with Ben Stiller and that whole crew. I was an office PA. How I got into visual effects the first time was I was just always desperate looking for work. It was just job to job to job. And a guy called me one day. He's like, hey, I know you're not a location scout, but someone's going to call you and ask, have you lived in LA? Do you know anything about it? And can you help them with this project? I'm like, sure. Calls me. He's like, are you a location scout? I'm like, nope, but I've lived in LA my whole life. He's like, I'm desperate. Come in. And he calls me in. I'm like, what's the job? He's like, all right, I need you to find some place I can set up a 30-foot tube, a metal structure, and I need to shoot a fireball out of it at night for a visual effects shoot. And we have 3 days. I'm like, okay. I'm like, you're really desperate if you're just calling some random guy with a map in LA who knows LA really well. And I just drove around and finally.
How did you get to that point, right?
I know. I'm like, wow, you're desperate. But sure enough, I found this abandoned parking lot. I got the permits. It turned out it was for Star Trek 9. It was one of the no, it wasn't Star Trek 9. It was one of the Star Treks, and it was for Digital Domain. And they needed to shoot an element of a fireball at night. And then I got a job at Digital Domain in their commercial division. And I actually didn't love it. I loved the people, but the culture at the time was really just way too many hours, not enough pay.
Oh, so the crunch.
Yeah, it was really bad. Like 110 hours in 7 days and no overtime for it. I'm like, I can't do this. And I remember a producer pulling me aside. She's like, just so you know, I've worked 65 hours a week with no overtime for 2 years. I'm like, and I was, getting married to my wife at the time, and we were engaged. And I'm like, I can't do this. And so I was working in commercials, and I would always call the advertising agencies. And every day I'd call them at 5:00, they'd always be gone. I'm like, well, I'm going to go do that. So we were moving to Chicago, and I got a job in advertising. And then I left that, and I got actually a master's in theology. I worked at a sushi restaurant. I worked as a janitor. I kept working in advertising. I kept trying to find something that I liked. And thankfully, my wife was very patient, but she was also, getting to the point where it's like, you're 34. We have a child.
Yeah, but what was happening? Didn't anything click, or it wasn't just the right time or place?
No, it was basically I kept doing all these jobs, and the conversation I would have with myself was, do I want my boss's job? Do I want anybody? Is there any chance for advancement for me in this field? And I would get into the job and I'd be like, I'm doing fine at it. They want to promote me possibly. I don't want my boss's job. It's not something that I want to make. It's great for a job, but it wasn't something I wanted to have a career. And that's kind of what I was looking for. And so I just kind of kept having good jobs, made money. I wasn't doing great, but we were getting by. And I just kind of kept trying to figure out, what is it that's going to click for me?
You had this wanderlust.
I did. And I realized, to be honest, that I realized pretty early on that I wanted to do something creative. I wanted to produce something. And for me, I wanted to have some spiritual component in my life. And I knew those were the 3 things I wanted to focus on. And I knew I needed to get paid to do hopefully 1 or 2, or maybe all 3 of them, but ideally 2 of them. In every job I'd get into, it'd be like, it doesn't. And then we were living in Chicago, and we were feeling the tug to come back to Los Angeles. We had a young child. Our family still all lived there. My wife, Liberty, her dad had been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And it was just and we were in the middle of our 5th winter. And we loved Chicago. I don't think we would have left, but changing a diaper in the pouring snow, not having a job you like, family getting tugged, we're like, what are we doing? So we were watching, the only show we watched back then was the show Alias. And I remember seeing my friend's name in the credits. And I didn't know what a visual effects supervisor was. I didn't know anything about what he did. I mean, I knew a little bit about what he did because I had visited him once, but I didn't really know what the job was. Because I had worked on the vendor side of Digital Domain, and he worked on the show side. And so I hadn't talked to him in probably 7 years. He had always said, I can't get you a job. really, because we were both starting out with the last time I had talked to him. So I thought maybe he'd get me an interview, maybe get me in front of on somebody's desk, because I thought I was going to try and become a producer of some kind. And I called him right after the finale in May of 2005. And he's like, oh, good thing you called me. I'm crewing up for next season of Alias tomorrow. Do you want to work with me? I'm like, sure. But we weren't planning to move till October, and this is May. And all of a sudden, I'm like, when does it start? He's like, 6 weeks. So now it's like, oh, we got to sell a house. We got to move. It was a little crazy. But 6 weeks later, I'm on the set of Alias with Jennifer Garner in a cornfield in Simi Valley, California. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is different. And all of a sudden I realized the difference between on the vendor side and being on the show side. And that's when I kind of fell in love and finally found what I wanted to do. But I did, it took a long time. I was, 34 at the time, and had tried every possible thing I could try and think of. And so then it was almost trying to fail like I was playing catch up, because all the other people I knew had started in their early 20s. But I was really lucky to get in with J.J. Abrams and that crew. So I worked on Alias, and then it so happened that the person who was the coordinator, so I started as a coordinator. The person who happened to be as the coordinator on Lost actually left right before the finale. So I did both the Lost season 2 finale and Alias series finale at the same time. And then the next year I got to be as the coordinator on Lost 3. So
diving right into the heavy stuff.
Oh my goodness, it was just right into it. But I really didn't know what I was doing at all. The story I tell, which is totally embarrassing. But the other thing my friend told me when he hired me was, he's like, well, I really need to get you up to speed, because in 6 weeks I'm going on my honeymoon and I'm going to leave you in charge. And I'm like,
what?
I didn't go to film school. I've never been on a set. He's like, and the joke we told was, he's like, look, it's like our director Dr. Ford used to say, it's better to make a strong wrong decision than a weak right one. I'm like, well, I can do that. I'm fine acting. And so sure enough, it's so embarrassing, but it's so funny. We were in the middle of season 5 Alias, and it's a huge VFX sequence. It's a stunt sequence, which is the guy getting ratcheted out of a plane, and it's a full green screen set. And the director, Fred Toy, who's a really good friend of mine still to this day, and I'm actually working with him on a project right now. He comes up to me, and I'm in charge of the set. He's like, hey, Jay, should we do this at 24 or 48? I literally had no idea what he was talking about. I'm like, we should do both. I need to have options. He's like, good call. And I remember walking away.
So what is that?
It was frame rate. Should we shoot it at slow motion or normal speed? And I'm like, I remember walking away and looking around at everybody on the set. And I'm like, I guarantee everybody else on the set knew what he asked for except me. And I'm like, but once again,
strong decision.
And it turned out to be the right one. Actually, it turned out to be the right one. But it was just a funny moment of, thankfully, I was empowered by my friend, and I had enough confidence in my ability. If it had been something else, Fred's a nice enough guy. I could have said, what are you referring to? If I needed to, but it was much better at the time to go boldly with a decision on the day. But that kind of started the ramp up of my education. So I learned things very quickly, being on set every day that I could, being in post every day, doing a show that's very demanding, lots of episodes, lots of shots.
So you basically learned by running through it. Yeah?
Straight through it. And then I did Lost season 3. And that one was a little tricky because they were filming in Hawaii and I was in LA. So that was a lot of really just delving in, working with post and working with the showrunners, Damon and Carlton. And I was the one in charge of getting everything approved because my friend Kevin was on set and I was the one in charge of all the review sessions. So that was a really good education also. And then I got to work on Cloverfield, the feature, the film. And there was an interesting moment at that where I had to figure out, do I want to try and become a VFX producer for films or try and become a VFX supervisor for television? And I kind of really needed to figure out what that next career path was. And I decided to try and become a supervisor for television because for me, my family is really important to me. And I knew if I had gone into features on the producing side, I would have had to travel because you have to be on set all the time.
Oh boy, but you did not know that TV shows would ramp up to this level, right?
Did not. So it was actually
because back in the day they were like
they're the little brother. It's like, oh, you're adorable. Oh, look at you doing your little TV show.
Yeah.
But it was a choice for family and a choice for professionally. And I liked the rhythm of TV. My friend and the person who gave me my first real job, Brian Berkey, told me one time, he's like, Jay, everybody hates making a movie and everybody loves having made a movie. And there's that thing about a movie where you're like, it's so hard and there's so much politics. And I didn't love the minutia of that as much as I loved the creative freedom that television gave us, especially working on J.J. Abrams type shows. So then I did the pilot for Fringe, and I was off trying to get some more experience on some other shows, just to try and get enough experience to maybe someone would give me a supervising job in a few years after I kind of continued to cut my teeth. And then Berkey called me out of the blue about 3 weeks into that project. And he's like, hey, do you want to be the supervisor on Fringe? And I'm like, I'm scared. Yes, sure thing. I don't have any idea what that means, but yes. And it was a tough show when you think about it. There were a lot of crazy VFX we were doing.
So you're saying supervisor. Can you walk me briefly through the process that you...
Yes. The VFX supervisor is the one who's creatively in charge of the entire project. So not only visually what it's going to look like, how you're going to film it, what you're going to do with that.
So like a creative director, but in VFX?
Yes.
Okay.
As well as the person who's technically in charge of the whole vision for it. So, and back in the day, we didn't have VFX producers dedicated to your show. So you're also kind of the VFX producer. And when you're starting out, you're also your own coordinator, because sometimes you don't even have one on board yet. And then you hire a coordinator, and they're kind of in control of the day-to-day, doing all the, making sure the versions are right, you know.
So
all
basically a producer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started, we didn't have enough money. So I was my own supervisor, producer,
Jack
and
of all
coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
And I had someone on set because we weren't shooting in Los Angeles. And that's the reason I got the opportunity, was because my friend, Kevin Blank, who I love to this day, he's still a great friend, you know, he was wanting to be on set. And at the time they were wanting to not be, and he had other aspirations to try and be on set more. And so he was filming in New York. And so I hired an on-set supervisor who had a lot of experience, but I was in LA as my own producer, coordinator, the everything. So kind of had to figure it all out. But that's kind of the role. So you're kind of the overall visionary. You're working with the writers throughout all of prep. You're working with the editors and producers through all of post. And you're the one making sure that the shots look correct. And you also are the ones picking the vendors for who in the world and where in the world you're going to do the shots.
That's a lot of research.
It's a lot of different
and networking
plates to
and
spin. Yeah.
People stuff. You know? So the imposter syndrome was there at the beginning.
Goodness. It's still there.
Well, I think all good people have it.
Yeah.
But how did you battle it? So what were the steps in your education?
Yeah.
Apart from the practical on-set education that you got day to day, what were maybe the books, the movies, the documentaries, what is the stuff that you delved into as to grow as a specialist?
That's a great question. My main film school at the very beginning was J.J. Abrams. So what was interesting was I was in my first meeting on Fringe with the showrunner, Jeff Pinkner, who's an amazing guy. But he's sitting there and we're going through all the notes that Bad Robot had for the pilot. And he's like, you know, I'm not trying to be weird, but VFX isn't really my thing. Just email JJ. And I'm like, the JJ, the guy I've met once at a party 2 years ago, who I don't even know if he knows that I'm the supervisor of his new and only show, because Lost is kind of its own machine and I'm now doing this. I'm like, okay. And so I email him like the first day. I'm like, hi, Mr. JJ, I hope you like the shots we're sending you. And what was interesting was JJ was already off doing, you know, the Star Treks and the Mission Impossibles and going off and doing that. But he loves VFX. And I don't know to this day if he was reading scripts, watching cuts. I know he was watching cuts at the very beginning when we were getting the thing off the ground. But what that started was a 2-year email chain with JJ that I never had a phone call with him and I never had an in-person meeting with him, but I sent him VFX shots every single day. And I had to learn how to communicate what my idea was. And then I got his notes back. And that was really my VFX school was, okay, I have this idea. What do you think? I have this idea. What do you think? And figuring out how to verbalize those very clearly in written word. Sometimes it was with a visual reference, but 99% of the time, he's a writer. I turned into more of a writer and just figured out how to describe things. And then he's a very passionate man, and his language can get kind of amazing when he loves something or when he doesn't, which is hilarious.
He's very direct about it.
100%. I had one of my favorite emails was this really difficult shot. If you remember from Fringe, there was a sequence where a guy's hand came through a television and grabbed his head, and it was a weird idea, and I was nervous about it. And that's the thing. I got to the point where I'm like, this doesn't quite feel right. And I'm like, I need some input and he was, busy with something, and there was only so many times I could bug him. I'm like, hey, bud, this is about to air in like 3 days. I don't love it. I'm like, but here's my thought, and what do you think? And he wrote back, and he's like, this is working, this is working. And then he just wrote, but I effing, and he basically cut and pasted the capital word hate 150 times in the email. And he's like, I hate the shot. If you can't tell, I'm not a big fan. I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? I've got a day. What can I fix it? And so
what did you do?
Well, we changed some things. We actually went back and changed the edit slightly. I was able to hear what didn't work, which was the same thing I was afraid wasn't working. But I didn't quite have the confidence yet in my career to make a wholesale change for something that I had a sense wasn't working for him. But it's still a weird sci-fi shot with a television screen stretching, kind of Videodrome.
Sounds like the Ring horror movie.
Yeah, but this was backing more like the Cronenberg sort of vibe. And Videodrome. And it's like, it comes through and it stretches and the raster lines. It was really cool, but it had a... You remember how the sharp edges sometimes in The Abyss and the water effect, and when it didn't have the sharp edges, it worked, and this had sharp edges. It looked like this weird glove instead of like an organic hand. And I think that's where, if I can say, like, the thing that we always came back to was it taught me that I always had to come back to something organic and real when I was working in sci-fi. So no matter what it was, the other story I tell that I showed at the conference we did the other day was the writers came to me and they're like, we want to bring a super soldier in from another dimension. What would you do? And I had this video. This was back when YouTube was just kind of starting, but it was a 15-year-old video. Now it's a 15-year-old video. And it was non-Newtonian fluid on a speaker. And it just kind of does this weird dancing weird thing. And I'm like, oh, look at this cool video. What if we did that? And they're like, okay. So I had this weird puddle that formed, and then it formed a gap. It could be anything, right? But because we had something visually that felt real, it grounded all of our sci-fi odd things in an organic reality. And that really is what I've always done. I've always just tried to make sure, what about this can feel real? What about this can I point to? What about this can I describe to my vendors? We had one moment where they wanted to make the walls semi-permeable for a bank heist. But I'm like, we shouldn't have it be liquid, because everybody does liquid, and they just walk right through them, and it just looks weird. I'm like, what if it's really hard to get through them, and it's like thick memory foam? So it's like you push into it and you kind of, and then we incorporated that into the story. And, and then we had to figure out what happens when it turns on. And JJ, this was what he always said. He's like, just make it vibrate. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, that feels organic. Boom, boom, just like every time someone touches it, it should have this kinetic energy to it, because if you don't, it's going to feel soft and weird. So I'm like, oh, okay. So literally, I threw a vibration, and it was like, it was kind of like what we used to do with camera shake and lens flares. I'm like, throw some dirt on the lens and let's have it vibrate, see if it works.
So it sounds like you're a practical effects guy first, and then 100%. CGI later.
100%. And it's the same thing where I wasn't a horror guy. Like, I wasn't into horror movies or gore, and I always had to do these shows that lean into that. But I think one of the reasons why they work with me as a supervisor is because we lean into it, but we don't glorify it. We don't
overdo it. Yeah.
No, and we don't make it about that. We do it to the extent that we need to tell the story, but the second the shot becomes about the VFX, it doesn't work anymore. It all of a sudden becomes about that. And whether you know it or not, instinctually, you're taken out of the story, because you're like, oh, look at that. I never want that. I don't mind someone going, oh, that made me feel bad. But I don't want oh, look at that.
Because
then it's about that.
Because like Mortal Kombat, for example,
Yeah.
where they focus on the fatalities and stuff like this.
And there's a place for that in those stories because that's what that story is about.
No, sure.
And even on Fallout, like, yeah, we go over the top with it. But each time it sounds weird, but it was story-based. And it was, for lack of a better word, it was always Jonah's idea. He's like, which
it's cartoonish as
exactly.
well. Mm-hmm.
And we were able to lean into that. But a lot of those are practical effects. Like a lot of them, even the weird shot that we did in episode 3, was it, when they crushed the guy's head?
Yeah.
We did a practical effect for that. If you looked at the before and after, we were doing a full like digital head replacement, and we kept in this weird puppet head that has latex ears that flap forward and the guy's face and we kept it because it's like it keeps that cartoonish practicality to it more than when you go full CG and it's like liquefies in a weird way that might be interesting but doesn't feel real.
Yeah. Okay. We will get Fallout.
That's my film school.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like quite the journey.
It was.
So before we get into some details that I wanted to get into, I have some like trivia questions.
Sure.
So what was apart from the learning curve, what was the most complicated show or movie or VFX sequence that you have tackled that feels jarring up to this day?
Jarring in what way?
Like,
good or bad?
No, it could be good as
Okay.
well. But you're like, good thing that I got over that.
Oh, man. I think I have different ones for different seasons of my life. Fringe was still kind of my baby. That was my first supervising job. And that one was this one episode where they're like, so we want them to take drugs and go into this weird world, and we need it to be fully animated. I'm like, guys, we're doing 22 episodes this season. You want to do, I'm like, okay, we can do 3 minutes and it can have 3 characters and 2 sets. And then it ended up being like 14 minutes, every character in the show. And we ended up doing almost like full CG animation.
Oh, so not 2D, CG.
No, it was crazy. And it was so hard. And even up until the last morning, we were supposed to deliver at 11 o'clock that morning. It was supposed to air the next day. And 6 o'clock in the morning, we hadn't even finished designing one of our main characters for the finale. I mean, it was down to the wire. But that one was one that was like, wow, this was really challenging and really interesting. And we came up with an interesting look that was really satisfying and beautiful and really fun to do. Westworld's whole season 1, but specifically that pilot, that was unbelievable. I remember reading it. It was back in the day when you had read pages, and I remember reading it and going over to Bad Robot, and I had to check out my script and then turn it back in. And I remember talking to Athena Wickham, who's a good friend who I've worked with for my entire career, I've worked with Athena. She was working with JJ back in Bad Robot days. And I remember talking to her, I'm like, because she was working with Jonah Nolan and Lisa Joy on the pilot. And I'm like, who are we thinking about for the actors? And she's like, oh, we're going out to Anthony Hopkins and Ed Harris. And I'm like, oh, that's the type of show we're doing. Because you read the script and you're like, wow, that could go any way. And you're like, oh, that's where we're going.
So you did not grasp the
scope.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I read all these amazing actors, and you think about that cast. I mean, Evan Rachel Wood and Jeffrey Wright and Tandaway, James Marsden. It goes on and on and on. It's unbelievable.
But for me as a viewer, because I watched Westworld right from the first episode, I was like, holy smokes, is this TV?
I know. It was unbelievable. I still put up there that I think Westworld was the most highly anticipated television show of all time. Because every other television show that went on to be anything didn't start out that way. Whereas that was like, JJ was at the height of his powers. Jonah had just come off of, Interstellar and Batman's and all of those. I guess he hadn't done Interstellar yet, but right coming off all of that stuff.
Dark Knight.
I know, all that stuff. So we had that kind of pedigree, and all of a sudden then we've got Anthony Hopkins. And the anticipation for that show was unbelievable. And that was really special, that first season. And just really trying to do things in an interesting way. Because I was coming from, broadcast television more or less, and doing something of that size and scale was really special.
So apart from your work, what are the movies that, or maybe TV shows, that you truly respect for their VFX stuff?
Wow.
It could be from any period.
Yeah. Like I'm older. So, I mean, it still comes back to Star Wars. And like, there's those moments when you're watching something and you feel like everything changed. For me, it was still Star Wars, and then a lot of things that I just loved through the 80s. Do you know what I mean? Like everything from Back to the Future to Ghostbusters and the way they used VFX in an interesting way to propel the story. And then when Jurassic Park happened, It was just like, oh, we just changed everything. I remember when King Kong came out, the first one, and I'm like, I didn't love the movie, but wow, that hair on that, I mean, that was insane. And then what they're able to do after that. So those ones for me are huge. I still love the Lord of the Rings movies just because I love them. And, when it comes to VFX, it was weird things, but it was things like Alias and Lost, because they were the ones that were kind of the first ones to say, how can we make this show feel bigger than it is? And there were other shows doing it. But I felt like what JJ was doing back then was really special. The two pilots, for me, when I saw Alias pilot, I'm like, that's the best pilot I've ever seen in my life. Like, hands down, doesn't even come close. And then the Lost pilot came out, I'm like, okay, well, now that's the best pilot I've ever seen in my entire life. And it still holds up. That thing is insane.
Lost is the TV show that actually got me into geeking about TV shows.
Exactly. And me too. Like, we were fans, more than anything. I was on the show and I was a fan. I couldn't wait for those scripts to come out. It was like the best. I would just go and
what's next?
I would literally just like sequester myself, and I would just sit in the afternoon outside on the Disney lot and just be like, this is unbelievable, So for me, it's weird. I like visual effects, but I like them as a tool. For me, it still just comes down to story. And I connect more with stories in some ways than I do with visuals. The visuals are obviously part of that, but I've always kind of leaned more into what do I feel in the midst of this? And then how does, the rest of the world make me feel? I think that for me is kind of what I love about what I do.
Speaking of tools, what's the latest and greatest VFX tool that you're excited about?
Wow. I mean, everybody's talking about, everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's talking about virtual production. I like them both as tools, just like you were saying. And I think they're going to make things hopefully faster and better, and give the artisans who create these things yet another tool that's going to be something that they can utilize, and that we're not going to get into the fear of replacement versus just a tool for an artist to use. So I am excited about the possibility of what we can use those tools for, because I do think it's pretty incredible what we've been able to already do technologically with those.
Did you get to use any of the AI tech in the production of Fallout?
We did. We used it for the deepfake. We used deepfake for Kyle MacLachlan for the flashback in the finale. We actually tried to use it for other things. We did a version where I wanted to see if we could do deepfake for Chris Parnell for the Cyclops. And we tried a version, and it didn't work. It felt like what it was, which was I'm cutting out an eye and putting it in the middle of his head. And we decided to go with a full CG approach for that, which was scary. But it worked out really well. The team at Important Looking Pirates just did an amazing job of capturing the humor and humanity of what we were going for there. We even tried a deepfake version for the ghoul, for the nose. We had a sculpt of it, and we didn't have enough training data to figure out what that's going to look like. Now, there's a world where I look at it and see, but the team from FutureWorks did such a good job, it's a little hard for me to say, let's change it.
Yeah, it was just yesterday that I watched that reel with FutureWorks. They did a fine job.
Amazing. And they'd only pretty much done 2D for me in the past. That was the fun one, is I had other vendors do that same shot from Philly, that heroic type, trailer shot with the sun behind him. And I had a few different vendors try it. And I strip off the slates. I love doing that. I strip off the slates and have Jonah and the Graham and Geneva pick. And everybody was like, that's the best one. So I had to call up the guys. I'm like, okay, so I know we've never really done something this big, but how do you feel about 500 shots for the season?
No pressure.
I know. And they stepped up and just did an amazing job, but it was a little daunting to figure out that methodology.
How do you, I'll just jump because you mentioned FutureWorks. How do you usually work with such companies? Do you just know them? Do they contact you? Do you give them test work? Or how does the process go?
It depends. Like, I've worked with some of the companies for so long now. I've worked with ILP since the pilot of Westworld. I've worked with COSA in Los Angeles since the first show I did when they were 4 people in a garage. I've worked with, and so part of it's that relationship. But when I get a new company, it usually comes from a recommendation from a fellow professional. It'll be like, hey, I got this new company. We say, they're my new favorite squeaky toy. Like, I love using them. And that's
check them out. Right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I found the company called Refuge in Oregon, of all places. And they've been amazing. But it came from a recommendation from a fellow supervisor. Sometimes it'll be, I'll randomly meet somebody at a conference or something, and then I will see a reel that they did. So this is what happened when I found Rise FX in Germany, where I had met Florian professionally. That was it. I saw a breakdown they did for the Avengers when they did the snap and everybody disappeared. They did the shot of the guy turning to ash and the wind blowing away. I'm like, ooh, that's really good. I got to remember that one. And then sure enough, I have a sequence when Hale is lit on by fire and she has to be, basically she's not dead, but she's kind of burning from the inside and she's charred mess. And I got to figure out, I'm like, all right, guys, you have one of the hardest shots of doing all season of how to capture this moment of horror and beauty. And it's not about gore, but it's about this, she's not dead,
aesthetics.
But it's really hard. Here you go. And they nailed it. And I'm like, okay, now I'll, like that's, and then they did some incredible stuff for us with hard surfaces. So a lot of it is, and then I'll just look at reels all the time, or I'll see something in a movie, or I'll see something on a show and be like, ooh, I really like that spaceship, or I really like that fire, or I really like that set extension, and then seek that company out and form a relationship.
How much time do you usually take to do this research? Or it just comes naturally, or you just do it in your free time?
Yeah, it's just part of the job. It's just part of, and it's part of like when you're watching a show. I can't tell you how many times I'll be watching a movie and I'll be like, oh, that's good. Oh, wow. Okay, good. I know them. Or like, ooh, I don't know them. I need to get to know them. Uh-huh. So that happens all the time. Like anything I watch.
So it's part of the game.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Or it's like, that didn't work. Who did that? Oh, okay. Good to know. Who?
But there is this widespread problem in the CGI company field, especially with the mass of Marvel movies that came out recently. Everyone was overworked. The level of the CGI kind of dropped. What's your take on it, and how does it relate to you? For example, because you have a pipeline, you have deadlines, and when the guys have like an order for years or months, how do you deal with that? How do you tackle all these problems in a concert?
Yeah, for me, that's where the job as a supervisor comes in. And I always say I try and give my creatives a safe playground to play in. And I'm not going to say yes to something if I know it's not going to live up to the standard that we have. So I'm and thankfully I have a very good working relationship with all of these people. And I've done it long enough now that they trust when I say, we shouldn't do that. That's a bad choice. Like even early in my career where I would read a script and I'd be like, that is a great effect. You cannot have it on episode 7 because that's the episode that has to be done before Christmas and it's July and it's not going to work. So you better, if you want that, put it right after that first hiatus at episode 16 and we can do it, and then they would move it and it would work. So there was always sort of that give and take even early on of like, guys, please, let's not set ourselves up for failure here. And I feel like sometimes the concepts end up being bigger than the timeline allows. And they always say, you can have it good, fast, or cheap, and you're going to have 2 of them. And it's like, well, let's figure out how to maximize our dollars while not really overworking our creatives, as well as putting out a product that just kind of doesn't live up to what everybody wants it to be. So I always try to make sure that we're not pushing ourselves to a point that's going to not only burn out our creatives, because that's my biggest thing is work-life balance of like, guys, if this is taking up too much, it shouldn't be that way, mixed with the creative that we all know we want to do. So I just feel like there usually is a solution creatively that's going to make it all work, is my hope.
Getting back to virtual production. So there are several methods. Doing pre-visualizations during the production on green screen, and then having the LED screen, the volume. On one of your talks online, you mentioned that you were one of the first creatives to use it, and I wanted to commend that. But how do you see this product evolving, and how do you use it now, and would there be a next step for it?
Yeah. For me, it's really, once again, it's a tool. And the challenge of it is it's so expensive, it's hard to find the right show that fits well with it. And then it's
Except The Mandalorian.
Yeah, but they also built their pipeline around it. And that's the thing, is that I worked with Jon Favreau on Revolution, and he's an amazing guy, an amazing visionary. And when Jonah came up with this idea in 2014, he's like, let's try it. And we tried it, and it didn't quite work. It was 2015. We didn't have a great set for it. We weren't quite sure. We were shooting on film. The memory, like, we had all these challenges with it, and we just kind of put it on the back burner. And we really wanted to kind of pursue it. And then we went and visited Jon together on the set of Mandalorian. We're like, oh, that's what happens when you can put all of it behind it. And it was amazing. But he built the pipeline around it. Do you know what I mean? Like, he thinks in that way. He did The Lion King. He's like, all right, well, what if we do it with humans? So let's, pre-visualize the season, and let's make sure our cameras all work and make sure our backgrounds all work, and then go shoot it again. But that's not the way, Jonah loves working. Jonah loves going to crazy locations, and he loves having it as a tool. He loves embracing technology, but it's how to use it as a tool while still having a financially viable option for it. And that's that balance, right? Of, well, the more you lean into it, the more economical it gets, but it also puts you in more of a box where you're a little stuck. In certain shows, it works great for it, and you can tell the story you want to tell, and it creates this beautiful, tool to use. But it's how to have that balance. So we love using it, but we don't use it in a traditional way. We don't truly previs our sequences. Once again, we kind of build a set and then make sure that we're covered technologically for our set, but we don't plan all the shots and plan all the angles, because that's the beauty of the volume, right? It's like, you're like, well, we can look anywhere. It all is going to work. We just have to make sure technically that we've planned for the correct angles and lighting and everything else. But once we do that, we just let them go and play. And it's like, great, you can move your camera wherever you want.
So basically what you think is next for the volume is just these big walls that can replace some background scenes.
Well, and that's what we've been using it for, is we basically and then you have to pick the right scene for it. You have to pick the right set, because some sets work really well for it and some don't work as well.
Because this gives this huge light, backlight as well.
And so it's a great as once again, as a tool for possibly for creative reasons, possibly for technical reasons, possibly for shooting reasons. If you're stuck there and you're like, yeah, we really do need to have a certain time of day for a longer period of time, it's like, great, you just keep it all day, and you don't have to worry about the sun setting or whatever it is. So there's different methods and reasons why it's really effective. It just kind of, it's a hard thing to be able to spend that much money for it, and also the other challenge is having the right creative vision, because you have to know how to use it. And I've, had the experience where you have a director and they're not quite sure. This was the first time on Westworld, and we had directors, we didn't quite have time to test it right. And you show up on set and you're like, what is this? Like, how do I use it? And you're like, is it a problem? Like, no, just shoot into it. We want you to shoot into it. It's like, but that's not how I designed my scene. Well, like, we need to shoot it. That's why we built it, So I think it just depends on what that piece is. And that one, what we did for Westworld the first time, it wasn't a volume. It was just an office and a screen. Like, it was just a single screen that we built, and it worked really well. Because once again, we were supposed to be from Valencia, Spain, in this beautiful environment. And it was like, all right, well, let's build it in Unreal and make sure that it all works and translates to camera. We could do multiple times a day. And it was really effective. And we were able to build it off a real environment. So it had that tactile reality to it because we had just been there in reality.
Wow. It's really amazing how fast everything moves. How challenging is it for you to adapt to the new toys?
I love them because they're just tools. And that is part of the fun part of the job, is always trying to stay one step ahead of it. And, thankfully, I've had a relationship with the team at Magnopus and Ben Grossman. And they were the ones who pioneered the technology with John on Lion King. They're the ones who, kind of came up with the cameras and the virtual production aspect of it with Rob Legato and that whole team. And so there's definitely times where I was just call them and I'm like, hey, what's coming down the pike? What do I not know, is that's out there? And we've been able to do some really fun R&D and some different things like that. And so part of it is just being aware of what's out in the environment, talking to people, checking out new technologies, going to different conferences and watching, different experts in different fields and reading as much as I can. And just because once you're in the soup of it and around it enough, you kind of can get a sense of where it's going. And trying to stay on top of it as much as you can, just so you can know what tools are available for your storytellers that you're working with.
Getting back to Fallout.
Yeah.
How did you get those Brotherhood of Steel costumes so right?
Oh my goodness, they built them. Everything
so they're practical.
That was the amazing part. The team at Legacy FX.
How are they so...
I know, they're so good. The only thing we had every now and then was the hands didn't quite articulate enough and they couldn't quite hold guns. So there's, we had to paint out zip ties, as they bolted the guns onto their hands and zip tied them on. But I mean, they were unbelievable suits that the team at Legacy FX built. And we only did CG versions when they were flying around. And that wasn't even that often. So yeah, the fact that he could run in it, the whole thing, it was unbelievable. Yeah, they were spectacular partner to build those.
So you keep saying that about cost effectiveness, but then again, for Fallout, you have so many built sets. So is still a build set cheaper than to do a volume recreation or a CGI background?
It depends on the set.
Because the vaults, they look great.
Yep.
The desert scene look great.
Well, but also for the vault sets, we extended a lot of hallways that people don't know. I mean, we did, I don't know if I should count, hundreds of hallway extension shots. And Howard Cummins, our brilliant production designer, he built them, and because we worked together for so long, he definitely knew. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to create a T at this one, I'm going to create an open one on this one, this is coming off of this set, this is coming off this set. So we have a great back and forth and collaboration with what that's going to be. So certain sets are cheaper. Like, yeah, building that, you got tons of, so much real estate when you can shoot these tunnels and just keep shooting them over and over and over again. And certain sets are probably more inexpensive to shoot. But you also can write. That's where working with your writers is so important, because you want to maximize these sets. So yeah, you write to the environment you have, right? But shooting on a volume is expensive. Shooting on those stages with all the technical people and the different lighting setups and the different DPs and the amount of testing you have to do. We shoot on film. Shooting on a volume on film is not easy, because you have to test, test it. You have to then get the stuff developed. You have to make sure it worked. You have to have a few rounds of testing. It's at least a week and a half sometimes, just for the environment, just to test it to make sure it's going to work. So the cost of shooting on a volume is not a simple thing either. And that's having great partners with the producing team, of just making sure all the pieces are going together. I've worked with Margot for, since Person of Interest, and just being able to have that trust of, when I say this is going to be expensive, when she's asking me, Jay, we need you to step up here because, and then just balancing it out for your budget for the whole season. That's part of the puzzle that we always have to put together every year. It's fun.
So Westworld was your own franchise, and Fallout isn't really. It's Bethesda's.
Yep.
And I've noticed Todd Howard as an executive producer. So how much creative control did the guys in the end have over the show that you were?
They gave a lot of trust to Joan and the team, but there was definitely that collaboration throughout the entire project, which was great. And James and the whole team at Bethesda has been incredible to work with. But that's been the fun part, is it's a collaboration. It's not we don't want it to send it to them because you just sometimes have those with studios. You're like, do I really want to send them my shots? But this was a true collaboration of like, no, let's get their thoughts, let's get their ideas, let's make sure we're nailing it. And they were involved from the beginning so early on. I mean, I came on at the very beginning in November of 2021 and even early in 2022, but they had already been involved, you know what I mean? And making sure the scripts had the tone they wanted. And Graham and Geneva are just so brilliant. I love the collaboration of the way all of those work together, where we have Geneva's written, Captain Marvel and these spectacle and this really heartfelt understanding of story and character. And Graham has this background in Portlandia and stand-up comedy and brings in that side of it. And Jonah has understanding how to create worlds and all of that other. And we have Todd and the team at Bethesda going, yes, you are nailing this thing. And I remember early on, sometimes you're on shows and you're like, this is special. Sometimes you're like, it's going to be hard to push it over the finish line because it's a good idea, but maybe this part's lacking. And I remember this one every single time. It was just like, oh, there's something good going on here. And you felt it kind of the whole time. And that's where we really hoped when it got out there that we weren't too close to it, that we felt like we had something that the fans would love. But you always have that little bit of nervousness, obviously, when you're in it. But since they liked it, we're like, well, it's their show, it's their world. It felt really special.
I was really skeptical about the show. Was. And you probably know that there is Fallout 76, which was, for me as a fan, a huge letdown.
Yeah.
And I hear that they've gotten their game back to a good level, but I haven't played it lately. And I was skeptical about the show, and then the trailer came out, and then I'm like, okay, let's watch.
Maybe.
Yeah, let's watch the trailer. And the trailer blew my mind. Yeah. It was very good. And right from the get-go, I was like, wow, I will watch that. So right from the trailer, you nailed it. At first, I was a bit weirded out. The guy with the eye in the center, I don't remember his name, the Vault Dweller.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Was a bit weird at the beginning, but you got the CGI so right that it quickly became a normality. My respect for that. So the show has been renewed for a second season.
Yeah.
So I believe you're actively working or started actively working on it. Yeah. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
You have a big army of fans. No pressure.
I know.
But then again,
we felt the same pressure before.
Yeah, so. but then again, there is so much story to tell.
Yeah.
There are many factions. The Enclave that hasn't been fully fleshed out. The Institute. So my podcast has several modules. So now that we found out more about your career, I'd like to find out more about what you think about the world.
Great.
And the ever-changing world apart from the VFX domain. What's your take on religion? Are you a religious person?
I am, actually. I grew up, my dad was a pastor. I grew up actually in Malibu. My dad was the pastor at Malibu Presbyterian Church. And it's always been a part of my life. That's when I went to seminary when I was in Chicago to kind of figure out, everybody had told me my whole life, you should do this, you should be a pastor. It's like, should you go into the family business sort of thing? And it was good. I went to seminary and I actually loved the experience, but I went and learned that that wasn't my calling. I had other things that I was supposed to do. And I still loved it, and I loved the experience, and I loved the environment and learning. But it's always been, actually a pretty big part of my life. Still go to church. It has been interesting as the world has changed, and what it means. It's especially in America right now, saying you're a Christian is almost a dirty word because it automatically means that you might be conservative, right-wing, leaning, hateful in some ways. And
so many people have radicalized the faith. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's what it's about. So that's been a challenge throughout my life. And there is a little navigating through Hollywood of figuring out what it means to have faith and to have that. And for me, it comes down to, do you focus on love and do you focus on trying to help people and hope and truth, and have that be the center of what you're trying to do, and let that be the guiding factor of your life more than specific rules or specific doctrines and being right. That's, I think, as you get older, I think it's about, are you able to embrace mystery in your life and understand that things don't make sense the way you want them to? And I think typical religion, in the way people view it a lot of the time, it just is about being right instead of being about love and being about what can help the world more.
But what kind of mysteries have you uncovered, or have you tied to your religious views?
Mostly it's that, the lie that if you just do the right thing, that things are going to go right for you and they're going to be okay, or they're going to go the way you expect them to go. That life is hard. People don't, when you're growing up, that's not really something that you live with. So it's more about the mystery of asking why. To me, is the hardest question not to ask, because we want to have answers to it. And a lot of the time life doesn't give you answers, and people want religion to give you the answer. And the religion isn't behind, going to God for me isn't about, well, why did this happen? He's like, that's not what I'm focusing on. Life is hard, and there's going to be bad things. It's like, what do I do with that? And do I have resilience, and do I focus still on, some things that can come out of that? And that struggle, and it really is a struggle. And really, at the end of the day, saying I don't know is part of the thing that's released me more into, freedom of being able to live life with some enjoyment, rather than trying to hold on to I need to have answers, and I need to have the right answers, and I need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And like, I don't know, and that's okay. And saying I don't know is so hard so much of the time, especially when you're younger and you're struggling through it. And
because you have to be confident about it.
I have to have a strong right decision, and it's like, but to have the freedom and the ability to say, I don't know. And for me, that's what it comes down to, and kind of embracing that mystery. There's a guy named Brian McLaren that I love, and as well as the older Franciscan monk named Richard Rohr. And they talk about a lot of life. It's about, for Richard, he separates it into, there's order, and that's kind of the way you live life when you're growing up, and there's rules, and that's good. And then there's disorder, something happens, life happens, chaos, and then it's reorder. And it's, what are you going to do with that? And are you going to basically just try and rebuild the same thing you had before and realize that it's not going to be the same? Or are you going to embrace the fact that it doesn't always make sense? And Brian talks about that life is kind of separated into simplicity. We start with simplicity, and then we move on to complexity. And it was like, oh, wow, this doesn't always make sense. And it's kind of, when you get to that point, which direction are you going to go? Are you going to lean into it and go, yeah, that's true, it doesn't make sense? And then you move on to something called perplexity. And it's like, well, this is really not easy. I don't understand this at all. And many people at that point, not many people, the inclination sometimes is to go all the way back to simplicity. Let me just go back to the rules. I just don't want to think about it. I just want things to, quote unquote, make sense. And if I can get rigid in my own mind and have that rigidity, then I can feel safe. Or can you move past that and move into mystery and harmony and kind of go, I don't know. And that's okay.
Yeah. But that's also a path to simplification, but maybe a more intellectual take on life, because really life gets very hard.
It's really
and
hard.
Fast, and with the advance of technology, TikToks, AI, you're just being bombarded with all this stuff. Speaking of that, how do you shield yourself from this informational noise usually?
I got off social media about 3 years ago. So I'm not on any form of social media. I've been on social media a little bit this week because I've been wanting to see what Mediacor and everything's doing, but I'm not really on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. So for me, what that's done is, well, there's still always an algorithm out there feeding me stuff, that's mostly on whenever I don't go on YouTube that much, but if I go on YouTube, I was like, oh, I have a perfect reminder of the fact that I really like weird explosion things mixed with stand-up comedy and SNL sketches mixed with big wave and because I'm a surfer and I love being in the ocean. So it's like, okay, that's I can see what the algorithm thinks of me, but because I've gotten off social media, most of the media I consume is me seeking something out. So that's the way I've been able to kind of shut off the noise. Is I don't have that 30 minutes to an hour to some, however much time people spend on it, of just living in my own bubble, which is the way the algorithm works. The algorithm always just feeds you what you want to see. And so by seeking out actual news sources and seeking news sources, I read news sources across every possible political and ideological line. Because I just, while
I'm try to triangulate.
Yeah, while I'm, far more progressive now in my thinking and views, I still want to see what everybody's reacting to and how they're reacting. So when something large happens in the world, I love reading all the headlines from every news source because I want to see what feels like news, what feels like propaganda, what feels like truth, what feels like opinion. And so much of it is opinion-based now. And I just want to, and part of that's fine, but I want to know what I'm consuming and what I'm reading and truly understand. I'm like, even when I'm reading something that I quote unquote agree with, I want to be able to filter it going, okay, well, that's just because it's their opinion and I happen to agree with their opinion. It's not actually news. It's opinion. And understanding that back and forth and how that fits into a worldview. But that's the way I just never after the, and it's interesting. My wife and I have two very different uses for social media. She's an artist and she uses it actually in a beautiful way to connect with people and be inspired. And part of it's like, okay, well, maybe if I just started over, I could redo it, but I was actually talking to a student here and he's like, so I did this 2 weeks ago. I completely changed. I just stripped my TikTok and started over. He's like, and it felt so freeing. And 2 weeks later, it's the same exact feed that I had before, And so it's like, part of me wants to go on and try it as an experiment. Just be like, okay, well, what would I now? Because my feed is, 10 years old. And it's just, all it is wave footage and, like I said, it's the same thing. It's weird comedy bits, wave footage, strange animal videos, and the normal thing people get in their Instagram feed. So I'd be interested to see what would happen if I tried to curate it more. But I never did a good job curating. And I see my wife's feed and I'm like, this is amazing. I can see why you enjoy this, and I also never used it.
Especially TikTok.
Yeah. No, not TikTok. Just Instagram. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I've never used it actually as a point of connection. For me, it was always something that just hit me. And so that's where my practice of it didn't utilize the tool in a way that was beneficial for me. It was just consumption. And it was just like, I would finish it and I'm like,
not socializing with the public. Mm-hmm.
No. And so if it's used in that way, I can see why it's actually social and not just media. And for me, it was like, okay, well, it's just bad sugar, cotton candy, bubblegum that I'm just sitting here consuming. I'm like, I don't feel good afterwards. I'm like, oh. After I look at it, I'm like, I don't feel good.
For example, I was really skeptical about TikTok. So of course I have Instagram. Of course I'm doom scrolling on it. I've let it learn about my hobbies, about my history, lessons of passion, about my Warhammer miniature painting, about stuff like this. But it hasn't really learned. But on TikTok, man, it's really good. It's razor sharp focused.
Yeah.
And what's really, really cool about it is that it gives you ideas that come near to your hobby. For example, I'm like, yeah, World War I, World War II are my focus.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you like a video about the Roman Empire, how they built their roads?
I would.
And I'm like, that's interesting.
That's fascinating.
And this sense of discovery on TikTok is for me what really brings it a step forward. but I try to limit myself to maybe an hour a week, you know, some stuff like this, because it's a rabbit hole, you know.
Yeah, totally.
So you mentioned about your surfing interest.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about your hobbies?
Yeah, I love surfing. I get in the ocean. I mean, I've been surfing a lot more lately. I try and get in at least once a week. Because I'm working, it means I'm just out there super early. So thankfully, my family supports my waking up at 5 a.m. as I go out to go in the ocean. And it also has become it's both a contemplative silent practice sometimes and also a way to connect with friends. And there's just something beautiful about sitting in the ocean early in the morning and watching the sunrise and just taking a minute to breathe before the day. I use it as exercise a lot. Sometimes the goal is just to get wet. It's literally, the waves are horrible. I'm just here to get wet, just to get some exercise and get out and enjoy nature. So I love surfing as much as I can. I love travel. It's, one of the beautiful reasons why we're here. I'm like, wait, we're going where? Where do we? Sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's go for it. We love that adventure. We love experiencing things like that. Those are two of my favorites. I golf a lot. Not as much as I want to, because I actually have just leaned more into surfing, and I'm not good. I'm not a great surfer at all. But I love it. And it's fun to be, in your 50s and getting better at something and getting stronger at something, which I didn't quite picture. I'd always stayed at the same level of surfing for so long, but to actually put in the work and get better at something when you're older is actually really, really enjoyable. Especially, I've been doing it for so long. I was mediocre at it. I was bad at it for 30 years. And so I like I said, I didn't even start surfing until I was in my 20s. I grew up in Malibu, but I grew up at a beach that was not good for surfing. It's good for bodyboarding, and it was big waves, and they just...
What's bodyboarding?
Bodyboarding is where you're laying down on your stomach, and I just paddling with fins, and would just get demolished on these huge waves, but they were not good for surfing. And so I didn't grow up surfing. I didn't start surfing until I was in college, but then I kind of fell in love with it and have done it ever since. But it's really been enjoyable to get better at something later in life, which has been fun.
So do you go to the gym as well?
We have a gym at the house, and so I work out there when I can. I have a road cycle, so I do like cycling. That was a pandemic situation, which I definitely, like many people, I went and got my road bike and truly love it. But I don't run. I try running. Sometimes I run try and get a mile in there every now and then.
Cycling is better for the knees.
Exactly. So I do that, and I have a rowing machine, and I do work out at the house. My main thing is I just love swimming. I just love being in the water.
You said about traveling. What are your maybe top 3 destinations that you would go back to if you had the chance?
It's funny, but like anytime I'm anywhere in the world, I always tell my wife, I'm like, this is great, but we could be in Italy. So I love going to Italy. Italy is a favorite. And we fell in love with going to Torino. There's a conference there, the View conference, that actually I think some students from here are going to this year.
Yes, 3 of our students.
Yes. So we're going to be there, and we've been honored by Marina Elena to be invited a few times to speak there. So that's been super fun. So I love Italy. South Africa, we have some friends there, and we got to visit there once, and we really want to go back there. We love that whole place. And then the other one for us as a family is Costa Rica. It has that beach, nature, environment vibe that we just truly love. But it's weird. Like, there's so many places we love. We come to a place, we fall in love with it. We went to Mexico City and fell in love with it. We came to Moldova and fell in love with it. And it's like, it's hard because we joke, I'm like, we only have one life. That's not fair. I want to be able to experience more of these places and more of these people and more of these environments. So that's been fun. But we really, we love the adventure of that mystery. We love art. We love architecture and history and culture and food. Oh, we love food.
Where is the best food in the world, in your opinion?
For me, it's Italy. It's like every time I go there, it's that. And honestly,
what's your food of choice?
It's out in Mexico City. It's both of those. It's the combination. Mexico City, from a cultural food standpoint, I probably would have to say Mexico City. I just love the sitting at a meal and enjoying all the pastas and all the pizzas and all the everything. It goes back to Italy. From a unique farm to table, I think it was probably South Africa. Just incredible. And we've been blown away by the food here, to be honest. Like, once again, coming to a place we knew nothing about. We've loved the traditional food. We've loved the more fusion, the fresh farm to table. Every meal here has been spectacular. So this is climbing up the list.
Thank you. You said that you usually wake up at 5 a.m. So when do you go to sleep?
I try and keep a balance. We go to bed, between 10 and midnight. It just depends on the day, depends on the work, depends on if I'm watching something. I don't always wake up at 5. That's if I'm only getting up to surf. Usually days now it's between 6:30 and 7. If I'm trying to work out before taking my youngest, we have 3 kids, 19, 18, and 10. And if I'm on my son's name is Dax. So if I'm Dax duty, then it's like, okay, well, do I want to work out before taking him? And now it's beautiful. We just moved and we get to walk to school. So that kind of is another thing, to just be able to have a moment to be able to walk. And we walk around along a nature path in the middle of the city, which is beautiful. So it depends, but I try and get between 7 and 8 hours. Unfortunately, I struggle with insomnia. So my body sometimes goes, how about you get 4? How about you get 6? But try and make the most of it.
Yeah, and traveling doesn't really help, right?
It's actually been pretty good. I've gotten pretty good at traveling. I don't get too bad at jet lag, which has been great.
That's great.
Going home is worse.
Do you have a secret for it?
It's different for everybody. For me, it's actually switching my clock when I get on a plane and just getting any amount of sleep. Mm-hmm. So when I'm trying to do these long flights, I'm like, just get any amount of sleep. And if I can go to sleep, then my body kind of resets. And that's what helps me out. And then it's when we hit the ground running, whenever we get anywhere, I just kind of lean into it, and we just we always joke, we land and we're like, all right, what 20,000 step day are we going to have? And then the other one that's fun for me is that first day when you're in a new city and you wake up at 5 a.m. because you can't sleep in because your body, I just get up and walk the city. So I love waking up in a new city and just getting out and enjoying just when a city's waking up, especially in Europe. I'm like, this is magical. There's something beautiful about the way.
What's different?
Well, it's just quiet, and it's like, it's not.
Isn't it quiet during the night in America?
Well, it's not. And there's not a whole lot of places I want to walk around and explore at 5 a.m. in Los Angeles. I'll go to the beach, but in terms of being in a city, I have some amazing photos and some amazing memories walking around Rome and Florence and Paris and in Budapest, and just waking up before sunrise or at sunrise and seeing how a city wakes up. I just love that. So I just kind of embraced it that first day, and then kind of get my body clock in check, and it works.
I'll switch the topic a bit. For us, the war in Ukraine has been a huge thing, obviously. We've been part of the Soviet Union forever. 2 years ago, it seemed like a threat that the Soviet Union is reforming, and we would also get into the meat grinder. Thanks to the Ukrainian army, we're not part of the war as Moldova. America has been a huge supporter of Ukraine, and you've been further away from the conflict, but now that you're in Moldova, probably some of your thoughts got refreshed about the whole conflict and how it came to be. So I just wanted to check in with how do you view this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's been what's the right word? It's been sobering to come and to realize how close it is, and to see the people here and their resolve, and to hear the stories of what happened when the Ukrainian refugees flooded into the country, and to hear what you did as a people without any message from the government, without anything, of just like, well, this is what we need to do. You're our neighbors. Let's open our homes. Let's have people stay on our couches for as long as necessary, to help these people coming through. And it wasn't self-serving. It wasn't, oh, because I know you're going to be protecting us. It's because you're here and, you're my neighbor. And what does that mean? And to realize the embarrassment of that doesn't happen in America. It doesn't happen as much as it should in many places. And to realize how close it is and how important the line that they're holding is for a country like Moldova, I think is really powerful. And to understand that it's beyond just the geopolitical of what that means.
It's a battle of ideas.
It is. And to realize that there's value in holding that line. And there's necessary resources that are required for that. And I think it's a powerful testament to protection and for what it means for your country and the surrounding region. I think it's really it's been very powerful to see and hear the stories just in the few days we've been here for what it's meant for all the people and understanding what that is.
Sorry for the very direct question.
Yeah.
How did you feel at the beginning of the conflict as an American taxpayer? Because a big portion of your money as a taxpayer is being funneled in the support of, let's say, the Western ideology, because we'll call it like the Soviet ideology and the Western ideology, which I'm obviously a part of and supporter of the Western ideology, because I do not want to live like in the Soviet Union. I want to live like in Europe or America. But how did you feel when the U.S. decided, or your government decided to support this conflict?
We were all for it because for me, it sounds weird. For me, it wasn't much about ideology or not. It was when I really think about it. But for me, it was about an oppressor versus an oppressed. And I'm like, that's not okay. We were part of relief efforts. Me, my wife, and the kids and all. We heard of a friend, and he was just loading up planes to fly over to the Ukraine, and we were part of trying to collect as many things as we could. And this was private. This was not the government. This was like, okay, well, what can we do? Let's collect everything we can possibly collect, all the medical supplies, all the clothing, we would go to these warehouses and help sort and help collect and load up as many pallets as we could to come and help the people. So we were all in from the very beginning when we heard about what was going on. And now that we're, seeing it here, we're even, probably more resolved to help where we can.
Thank you. Probably my last question would be about, so many people are talking about addictions and legalizing substances. And so alcohol has obviously been a substance that's been legal forever, and it's still a substance. I wanted to take your view on that. And of course, now pot is a thing that gets legalized, has been legal in Europe. Mm-hmm. And there are even more recreational drugs that people use. For some people, some drugs are normal, and for some, they are outlandish. But still, if we're taking this path into legalizing some of the recreational drugs. So the question is, what's your view on it? Is it okay to legalize these drugs? And how do you view alcohol in prism of the addiction?
Wow, that's a thick question. I think it's a challenging one from a legislation standpoint. I think from an individual personal standpoint, I enjoy a glass of wine. I enjoy scotch, and I enjoy making cocktails, but it's always about flavor and enhancement and enjoying what that can be, and never doing it to feel to escape. And I think that's where anything can be used for that. And that's, I think, the challenge is how debilitating that can be, to see that happen for everything from food to shopping to pornography to alcohol, to when it gets into addiction, it's going to be damaging no matter what it is. I mean, for crying out loud, we've seen gamers lose their life because they get addicted to Warcraft. I've seen it happen across everything, and some of them are more damaging for someone's life than less. Someone who is addicted to running, it's like, okay, well, your knees might give out someday, but it's going to be different than if you're drinking yourself to death. So it's like, I think that's where it gets a little complicated. And I do think there are drugs that are far more damaging. Marijuana, I've seen beautiful benefits of it for different people in my life for their health reasons, for pain, for relief. And it's like, wow, this drug didn't do anything, this pharmaceutical, but this plant gave me a huge relief that didn't come otherwise. So I've seen some really amazing things in that way, from anxiety and stress and leaning into, what God created on the earth versus, what we created in the lab. And at the same time, I've seen amazing things from a pharmaceutical when it's used correctly. But once again, there's challenges with those as well, with opioid addictions and all of those other things when you kind of, once again, are dealing with the symptom instead of dealing with the problem. So I think that's the challenge. And the legislation part, I do think criminalizing them can be challenging, but I also think decriminalizing them, it's like, I was reading an article, it's like, well, when they decriminalize drugs in certain cities, it's like, well, they should have asked the drug addicts if they should have decriminalized it because it went horrible for them. Do you know what I mean? So there's certain ones that, I don't think it's right that somebody got 5 years for having some marijuana, and the day after they got convicted the day before the law got passed. The next day they should have been let out of jail, and they've been in jail for 5 years. There's some backwards things about criminalizing marijuana, especially with how it impacted the African American community in the U.S. to be specific. So I think there's challenges with those things, but the individual choice and how you use something is, I think, the hard thing to legislate from a governmental or law standpoint.
Fentanyl has been a huge problem lately, and we've also seen these shots from all the major cities in the world, but mostly it's the cities like in the U.S., like Seattle, where it is the center of this town is swarmed by fentanyl addicts.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it? What should be changed, or what has gone wrong?
Yeah, I don't even know. There's so many problems with it, and I don't think criminalizing and penalizing and filling people up in the jails is going to fix the problem. And we have a challenge in America. There's a thing of basically it's your fault. Whatever it is, it's your fault. And if success is your fault, and poverty is your fault, racism is your fault, like there's a lack of communal care, I think, that happens specifically in America. And when you have a community that comes around a problem and says, let's help the people rather than the legislation of let's make it illegal, let's penalize, let's be hard on crime and hard on drugs or whatever it is. But because we lack the communal idea of social service to help people and share, the amount of billionaires in America is disgusting. And the fact that they won't tax stupid things like country club golf courses and the amount of money that's lost on a city, if they just taxed it, for crying out loud, the private country clubs, you would have enough money to deal with half of these problems. But it's that, systemic issue of sharing, I think, that a lot of times, and not even financial, it's care. It's, do we look at this as a human, that we don't blame them and say, well, this is your fault? Do we try and help the systemic causes and then deal with how they got there and try and look at that first rather than the problem on the ground, which is, and so I think it's about education. I think it's about trying to figure out some of those things from more of a systemic and societal standpoint. And I think that's the long-term challenge. It's the same thing with homelessness and all those other challenges that, many cities have in the world, but America's kind of acutely got the challenge right now.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Because, for example, you guys band together to create a great product. You have good networking, so you're working in this direction. And then other people could band together to do positive things like helping the community. And as well, you said that you banded together as to help the Ukrainian refugees with meds, with the clothes, with stuff like this. It also would be beautiful to band together as to save the community.
I know, right? It'd be like, wow, what if we could actually get all on the same page for this? Do you know what I mean? You have moments of it, but the problem right now we have is that everything's so polarized, Do
you think it's artificial, this polarization?
No, I think it's...
How did it happen from your perspective?
Oh my goodness.
Because it kind of degraded into...
Yeah. And I think part of it, honestly, is the way we consume media as we stay in our own bubbles. We don't listen. We don't have conversations. We don't practice having conversations with people we disagree with. We've become more and more divided in terms of just ideology, and we've separated out into us versus them in so many ways. And I think we all suffer from that. And I think because of that, then if we don't agree with you, then you're the enemy. We get to that polarization point, and then it's, there's a problem that I see sometimes in America where we don't acknowledge our past enough to admit our failings, and then we just want to cover it up. We want to ignore slavery and racism and what that means for an entire group of people and what it truly is for the fabric, and the fact that we're trying to remove these things from textbooks. And it's unbelievable to me that we don't understand that is our history. Let's actually understand what it is, so we're not going to repeat it. And now we're getting to the point where it just feels like we're repeating some of the same things that we did in the past, and letting hate and fear drive who we are, instead of, like you said, seeing people for who they are and coming alongside them in that way.
Thank you, Jay, for the great discussion. It has been an honor.
Thank you so much.